My name is Claire, and I'm 43 years old. I've lived in the same apartment building since I was 9, the kind with cracked hallways, chipped paint on the stairs, and neighbors who've long stopped saying hello. Apartment 3C is where I learned to ride a bike down the hallway, where I first stayed up all night to study, and where I once dreamed of leaving. But life has a way of softening your plans until they start to look a lot like staying. My parents still live there, James and Linda. Dad's hearing is going. And Mom has arthritis so bad she can't button her own coat in the winter. The building has no elevator, which means I carry their groceries up 3 flights of stairs every week. I don't mind. I never did. My younger sister, Sophie, though she minds everything, she's 13 years younger than me, practically raised like an only child. When I was applying for college scholarships, Mom was knitting pink booties for the baby she hadn't expected to have. And when I started working full-time, Sophie was learning how to put glitter in her hair and charm her way out of chores. Some people are born into expectations. Others are born into excuses. I was the first kind. After finishing school, I got a steady job at a mid-sized insurance firm. Not glamorous, but secure. Daniel, my partner of 8 years, calls me the quiet anchor. I think he means it as a compliment. We never had kids. Never really planned to. That left me with a little more room to give emotionally, financially. For years, I used that space to help my parents, fixing the leaky faucet, paying for Mom's dental work, covering the gas bill in January, just little things, quiet things. Eventually, the little things added up. The building got worse. Mold started blooming in the corners of their bedroom ceiling. The pipes groaned at night like they were mourning something. One winter, the heat shut off for 3 days straight. That's when I started saving with purpose. I opened a new account, not in my name, not in theirs, but a shared one set aside only for one goal, to move them out. Somewhere warm, somewhere with a ground floor and working plumbing. I talked it over with Daniel. He agreed. We cut back. We skipped vacations. We put off buying our own place. Every paycheck. I moved a portion into that account. I watched the balance grow slowly. 30,000, 50, then 80. It became a kind of quiet mission, a promise I kept making to myself each month. I never told Sophie, not because I wanted to exclude her, but because I knew what she'd say. They're adults. Claire, you don't have to take care of everything, but someone had to. And she was always too busy chasing something brighter. Sophie had moved out 5 years ago to pursue something meaningful. At first, it was acting. Then it was photography. Lately, she'd been talking about opening her own cafe, an artsy little spot with reclaimed wood and lavender lattes. She called it her soul project. I smiled and nodded when she talked about it. Everyone needs a dream, right? What I didn't know, what I couldn't know at the time, was that her dream was about to cost me mine. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all I remember is the flickering hallway light outside apartment 3C. It had been broken for months. Every time I passed it, I thought I should call someone about this, and then I didn't. I wonder now if that light was the first sign, a small warning that something was going out, something I couldn't fix with a phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon when Sophie showed up unannounced. I had just finished scrubbing the kitchen. Sink. Mom had left a pan soaking for 2 days and the smell was clinging to the walls. I wasn't expecting company, so I was still in my old t-shirt and hair pulled back, damp from the steam of a rushed cleaning. She came up the stairs 2 at a time, as if the building hadn't aged a day since we were kids. "Claire!" she beamed, holding a coffee in one hand and a cloth tote bag slung over her shoulder. God, this place hasn't changed a bit. That wasn't entirely true. The wallpaper had peeled further. The handrail was loose, and the smell of damp clothes lingered in the hallway. But I didn't say anything. She kissed Mom on the cheek, hugged Dad lightly, and plopped down on the faded couch like she'd never left. I stood in the kitchen, drying my hands with a dish towel, waiting for whatever this visit was about. Because with Sophie, there was always a reason. "So," she said, stretching the word like taffy, "I've been working on something." I leaned against the doorway. "Okay." She pulled out a folder from her bag. It was thick, full of color printouts, menus, floor plans, inspirational quotes about entrepreneurship. "It's a cafe," she said, eyes bright. But not just a cafe. It's a space, a vibe. Picture this exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a wall of used books, local art. Live music on Fridays. You feel me. I nodded slowly. I call it Bloom, she said, whispering the name like it was sacred. I see, I said. She launched into her plan: organic suppliers, community support, profit sharing with artists. She had even picked out the coffee machines and partnered with a barista who used to work in Portland. So, you know, he knows his stuff. It wasn't until Mom brought in a tray of lemonade that Sophie got to the part that mattered. I've been talking to a few investors, she said casually, stirring sugar into her glass. But I realized I don't want this to be just a business. I want it to be rooted in something real. Family. I felt the shift before I saw it. Mom set the tray down a little too gently. Dad cleared his throat and looked out the window. Sophie was watching me, not them. I was thinking, she said slowly. What if we use some of the house fund? The room stopped moving. The what? I asked. Sophie smiled as if I was being dramatic. The savings account. Claire, the one you started with Mom and Dad. I know it was meant for the future. But this is the future. Think about it, what better investment than something that could actually grow? I blinked. Once. Twice. That money was for them, I said, for a place with a working elevator. A place where Dad doesn't have to drag groceries up the stairs. Where Mom can sleep without mold in her lungs. I'm not asking for all of it, Sophie said quickly. Just a loan. I'll pay it back. I swear, once we're up and running, I'll even contribute to the house fund. I turned to our parents, Mom, Dad. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad sipped his lemonade. I felt something slow and cold settling in my chest. You already said yes, I said quietly. No one answered. Sophie came to you first, I continued. And you didn't tell me. Still, silence. It wasn't the betrayal that stung the most. It was the assumption that I would understand. That I would keep giving no matter what. Sophie leaned forward, her voice softer now. Claire, I just want to build something that matters. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel. She was just. Sophie, still believing that dreams bloom better when someone else waters the soil. I stood up, folding the dish towel slowly. I hope it works, I said. Then I walked out of the room, down the cracked hallway, past the flickering light. Behind me, no one called after me. For 3 days after Sophie's visit, I didn't go back to the apartment, not out of anger at least, not the kind that yells and slams doors. It was something quieter, a numbness that settled into my bones, like cold after too long in the rain. I still packed Mom's medications into their weekly pill box, still called to remind Dad about his checkup, but I didn't climb those 3 flights of stairs. I couldn't. Daniel noticed the change. You've been staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes, he said softly one evening as we sat on the couch. I blinked, the silence between us thick. They used it, I said. The money, I know they did. They didn't even deny it. Daniel reached over, took my hand. He didn't say I told you so, even though he could have. He never liked how I managed everything alone. Never liked how my name wasn't really on the account. Even though it was my money filling it, I just wanted them to be safe, I whispered. I didn't want thanks. Just safety, he nodded. And they chose a coffee shop. It wasn't just the money. It was what the choice meant. That Sophie's dream mattered more than their own reality. That my work, my care, my years of quietly showing up, they weren't worth protecting. On Sunday morning, I finally returned. Mom was in the kitchen peeling carrots with a tremble in her wrist. Dad was asleep in the recliner, TV flickering soft blue across his face. Sophie wasn't there. I opened the fridge to find a dozen cartons of oat milk, labeled with handwritten notes. For shop testing, don't use. I closed the door quietly. Later, in the living room, I asked Mom directly, Did you move the money? She didn't look at me. We're still figuring things out, she said. That's not an answer, she sighed, long and tired. Claire, you've always been the stable one. You're okay. Sophie, she's still trying to find her place. I stared at her, disbelief crawling up my throat like bile. So you took her uncertainty, I said, and traded away your own security for it. She winced, but didn't deny it. I thought we were planning together, I said. I thought this was about all of us. It still is, she replied gently. It's just, maybe it looks different now. I stood up. Too quickly. The chair creaked behind me. I don't have a place here anymore, I said. Not really. I'm not a daughter, I'm a resource. Mom didn't stop me when I walked toward the door. In the hallway, I paused. The light was still broken, and in that dimness, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about being seen, and I hadn't been, not for a long time. The following weeks unfolded like fog, slow, heavy, and hard to hold. I still called every few days. I still reminded Mom to check her blood pressure, still scheduled Dad's appointments, but I stopped showing up in person. I stopped walking up those familiar 3 flights of stairs. I told myself it was just temporary, that I was giving space, that I was busy. But the truth was, I didn't know how to step into that apartment and not feel like a stranger. Meanwhile, Sophie had moved in. It's just until the shop opens, Mom had said on the phone, trying to sound casual. She wants to be closer to the suppliers and, help us around the house. Help, I repeated. She's trying, Claire, trying. That word stayed with me, because trying was something I'd done for 20 years quietly, consistently, without being asked. But when Sophie did it, suddenly it was a miracle worth celebrating. Daniel noticed the change in me. You're quieter, he said one evening. Even for you, I think I've been replaced, I said, not quite joking. He looked at me for a long time. Do you want to be? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the account, the one we had started years ago, meant for the new house, the safer place. The balance was down to 4 digits. There were no notes, no explanations, just transfers. Out, 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 out. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because there was nothing left to break. I closed the account that same night, quietly, without ceremony. I opened a new one in my own name. Daniel offered to match my next deposit. We didn't say what it was for, but I think we both knew. A week later, Aunt Helen called. She was the only one in the family who ever asked how I was before asking for something. I stopped by the apartment, she said. Brought your mom some of those soft ginger cookies she likes. How was she? Distracted, Aunt Helen replied. And Sophie was. Well, let's just say she's redecorating. New curtains. Moved the furniture around. She turned your old room into a vision board studio. I closed my eyes. I hadn't lived there in over a decade. But still, it stung. That room had once held my books, my high school trophies, the small box of letters from Daniel when we first met. Now it held Sophie's dreams, taped to the walls like promises. She told me they're calling her the energy of the house, Aunt Helen added gently. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. I had been the structure, the routine, the to-do list on the fridge. Sophie was the energy, the excitement, the one who got applause for simply showing up. That night, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I made a decision. Not to fight, not to prove, not even to explain, but to begin something for myself, something no one else could spend, or borrow, or rearrange into their own version of love. Autumn came without warning. The leaves outside our window turned rust-colored overnight, the air thinning just enough to remind us that time was moving, whether we liked it or not. I hadn't been to the apartment in nearly 2 months. I still called, still checked in, still did the invisible work of scheduling flu shots and refilling prescriptions. But now, my name came after Sophie's when people talked about who's taking care of things. Apparently, being visible was more important than being consistent. Then one afternoon, Aunt Helen called again. She's not doing well, Claire. I froze. Mom, no, she said softly. Sophie, the shop. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What happened? She's 3 months behind on rent. The barista left last week, and she asked your mom if she could borrow more money. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. Aunt Helen sighed. Your father said they might dip into the emergency savings. What emergency savings? The little that's left that night. I passed by the shop for the first time. It sat on the corner of a quiet street, tucked between a dry cleaner and a failing art gallery. The lights were still on. A chalkboard out front advertised pumpkin maple cold brew, now $7.50. Inside, I saw Sophie behind the counter, staring into a register drawer that looked far too empty. She didn't see me, and I didn't go in. I walked home slowly, passing shuttered windows and cracked sidewalks, thinking about how dreams collapse, not all at once, but in the corners first. The unwashed mugs, the unpaid invoices, the way a room grows quieter every day until it feels like it's waiting for you to give up. Daniel was in the kitchen when I got home, peeling apples. "How's the shop?" he asked, not looking up. "Autumn themed," I said. He smiled faintly, then grew serious. "Are they asking you to fix it?" "Not yet. But they will." I nodded. The next day, Mom called. Her voice was quieter than usual. "She's trying so hard. Claire," she said, "you know how much this meant to her." "I know," I replied. "But trying doesn't always mean succeeding." There was a long pause. "Your father fell last night," she said finally. "Just a slip in the hallway. Nothing broken. But I think it scared him." I closed my eyes. "Do you need help?" I asked carefully. Mom hesitated. "We might. Just for a little while. Until things settle down." "What things?" I asked. Another pause. "Sophie's thinking of closing the cafe." There it was, the first crack in her voice. The first break in the illusion they'd all worked so hard to maintain. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't ask where the money had gone. I didn't even mention the fact that I'd offered a safer future, long before Bloom was ever an idea. Instead, I asked when they needed groceries and which doctor Dad was seeing next. Because sometimes, the only way to stay human is to keep caring even when no one cared enough to protect you. The shop closed on a quiet Tuesday. No announcement, no farewell party, just a handwritten sign taped to the front window, temporarily closed due to restructuring. But there would be no restructuring. There was nothing left to structure. I found out from Aunt Helen. Of course. She called after spotting Sophie moving her things out boxes of mugs, framed quotes, a stack of unopened invoices. "She's coming home," Aunt Helen said. "Back to the apartment?" I asked. "She already has." I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stared at the teacup in front of me, the same one I'd used for years, stained just enough to remind me that time leaves marks on everything, even ceramic. "She's hurting. Claire," Aunt Helen added gently. "Maybe this is what she needs to grow up." But I wasn't sure growing up was something you could borrow your way into. Later that week, Mom called. "She's been quiet," she said, helping around the house more, trying, really trying. I didn't ask about the money. I didn't ask about what was left of their savings. I didn't ask how they were paying the rent now that Dad had finally stopped working, because I knew the answers. And because some wounds don't need reopening, they just need air. Then one afternoon, I went back. The building hadn't changed. Still no elevator. Still that flickering hallway light. Now completely dead. Sophie was in the kitchen, folding laundry. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe just heavier, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had carried a dream too far and dropped it somewhere along the way. She looked up when she saw me. "Hi," she said. "Hi." There was a long pause. "I was going to call," she said. "But I didn't know what to say. You didn't have to say anything." Another pause. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "About the money. About not telling you. About all of it." I nodded. That was all. Because the truth is, I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Mom stepped out from the bedroom, wiping her hands on a towel. She smiled when she saw me, like she didn't expect me to really come. "I made soup," she said. "Your favorite." With barley and carrots, I sat at the table. Not because I had forgiven them, but because some things are older than pain, older than memory. Family, when it's broken, doesn't always get put back together. Sometimes it just reshapes itself. Over dinner, no one talked about the shop, or the lost money, or the house we never bought. We just ate. And in that silence, something began to settle, not healing, not repair, just understanding. 6 months passed. The apartment didn't change much. but the air inside it did. Sophie stayed. Her dreams now folded into laundry piles, late shifts at the diner, and quiet apologies she couldn't quite put into words. Mom called every few days. Dad was sleeping more, talking less. The building kept aging with them, the walls growing softer, the pipes groaning louder. I still visited less often than before, but often enough to see the weight of their choices settle like dust across the floorboards. They never asked me to fix anything again, and I never offered. That, somehow, felt like progress. Daniel and I were finally putting in an offer on a house. Not big, not flashy, just enough. One Sunday afternoon, I came across a box while packing old photo albums, my college diploma, a birthday card from Mom years ago with a $10 bill still tucked inside, and beneath it all, a small cloth-bound notebook. I opened it and felt my breath catch. It was Mom's handwriting, neat, careful, with curled letters and fading ink. A list. Every deposit I had ever made into the old savings account. Date, amount. Notes in parentheses, Claire's bonus, canceled vacation, groceries she paid for and wouldn't let us reimburse, pages and pages of quiet sacrifice. At the very end, just one line, we didn't see it in time, but we see it now. I sat with that for a while. Not crying, not angry, just still. A week later, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was Mom's old pearl necklace, the one she wore to church, to weddings, to the hospital when Sophie was born. No note, just the pearls. Daniel found me at the kitchen table, necklace in hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, actually, I think I am." The next morning, we went to sign the paperwork for our new home. The air smelled like fresh paint and possibility. As I stood in our empty living room, sunlight streaming in, I realized something. This was the life I built. Quietly, steadily, without applause. Not out of resentment, but out of truth. I had spent so many years giving. Now, finally, I was learning how to keep. Sometimes, the people who give the most are the ones no one remembers to thank. They show up, they sacrifice, they stay quiet, but deep down, they carry the weight of an entire family and still smile like it's light as air. If you've ever been the steady one, the silent one, the one who held everything together while no one noticed, this story is for you. Tell us in the comments, what have you carried that no one saw? And if this story touched you, consider subscribing. We share real, emotional stories that speak to the quiet corners of the heart. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from being seen. And here, you are seen.